He didn't see it coming. One moment he was sitting at his desk, planning his week, answering emails, and thinking about his weekend. The next, his screen blinked with an unexpected notification from HR, an announcement about workflow optimization. Nothing dramatic, no alarms, no warnings, just an email title that looked normal, professional, safe. But that one email marked the first moment his future began to slip out of his hands. Josh was 32, a project manager at a tech company in California's bustling Bay Area. He believed in structure, routine, and his own ability to solve problems. He had been good at his job, organized, dependable, respected by teammates, even liked by leadership. He wasn't exceptional in a flashy way, but he was steady, consistent, and dependable, the kind of person managers trust to deliver on time, every time. When the optimization email hit his inbox, it didn't sound threatening at first. Corporate language rarely does. It talked about emerging tools, efficiency gains, and a committed focus on leveraging new technologies to support our workforce. The words were peppered with friendly phrases like empower, support, and future ready, phrases that made the message sound optimistic, even exciting. But the deeper meaning was already unfolding below the surface. No one mentioned danger, no one said AI is replacing jobs, but they didn't have to. Over the next few days, Josh began noticing subtle shifts in the way his team communicated. Meetings that once involved deep brainstorming now included quiet pauses. Tasks he used to lead were reassigned to automated tools with slick dashboards and predictive suggestions. People spoke less about ownership and more about workflow alignment. The language was polished, the tone was casual, the impact, quiet, insidious, and unignorable. At first, it felt like normal adaptation. After all, the company was in tech, innovation was expected. Everyone talked about using tools to enhance productivity, reduce repetitive tasks, free up time for more creative work. That narrative felt comforting, reassuring, until the realization hit, no one was actually doing more creative work. They were just doing less. Josh watched colleagues who'd once owned complex decisions step back, trusting automated suggestions with minimal oversight. AI drafts replaced meeting summaries. Predictive scheduling replaced human coordination. Budget forecasting, once a skill honed over years, happened inside an algorithm that never tired, never asked for breaks, never needed praise. At first, it seemed like progress. Nice, helpful, even exciting. But progress isn't always gentle. One afternoon, Josh opened his work laptop and noticed a notification blinking in the corner. New role recommendations based on optimized workforce alignment. His heartbeat quickened without warning. Was it a suggestion, a promotion, a reassignment? The words were harmless enough. Optimized workforce alignment sounded like corporate wellness stuff. But when he clicked, the message read something far colder. Your current role will be phased out as the team transitions to automated workflows. Affected employees will begin transition support next quarter. Those words, polished and polite, hit him like a silent blow. Not angry, not direct, just factual, efficient. And for the first time, he felt something he hadn't expected. Uncertainty. Not about work, about identity. Because for years, Josh had defined himself by what he did, the meetings he led, the plans he laid out, the problems he solved. And now, without drama or fanfare, that identity was quietly being rewritten by code. That message stayed open on his screen longer than he realized. He reread it, hoping he had misunderstood something. The phrasing was calm, supportive. It even included a paragraph about career transition resources and reskilling opportunities. But beneath the corporate softness was a simple truth. The role he had built his adult life around was no longer essential. He didn't tell anyone that day. Instead, he closed his laptop gently, as if moving too fast might make it real. Around him, the office carried on as usual. People laughed near the coffee machine, someone complained about a delayed shipment, a Slack notification chimed in the background. The world hadn't shifted, but his had. On the drive home, he kept replaying the words in his mind. Phased out, transition support, optimized workflows. It felt strange that something so life-altering could be delivered in such neutral language. No anger, no confrontation, just efficiency. That night, he opened his laptop again, not for work, but to research. AI replacing project managers, automation trends 2026, which jobs are safe from AI? The search results were overwhelming. Articles, think pieces, predictions, some optimistic, some catastrophic, some claiming new jobs would emerge, others warning that entire categories would shrink permanently. He clicked through stories of accountants, copywriters, junior analysts, all describing similar experiences. Tasks slowly delegated to tools, responsibilities reduced, titles reshaped. Some had pivoted successfully, others were still searching. What unsettled him most wasn't the loss of income, it was the quiet erosion of relevance. The next morning at work, everything looked the same, but it didn't feel the same. He noticed how often teammates deferred to the AI dashboard during meetings. Instead of debating projections, they asked the system. Instead of arguing strategy, they checked recommendations. It wasn't that people had become less intelligent, it was that they trusted the machine more than their own judgment. And Josh felt it, that subtle shrinking. When he offered an idea during a planning session, someone responded, "Let's run it through the model and see what it says." The room nodded. No one questioned the suggestion. It wasn't disrespectful, it was practical, logical. But in that moment, he felt replaceable. He started noticing how his own behavior was changing. He second-guessed himself more often. Before sending emails, he ran them through AI writing tools for tone optimization. Before presenting ideas, he checked predictive models. Slowly, almost without realizing it, he stopped trusting his own instincts. If the machine could analyze more data than he ever could, what was his advantage? Efficiency? The system was faster. Accuracy? The system was precise. Consistency? The system didn't get tired. He began measuring himself against something that didn't sleep, didn't doubt, didn't need validation. At lunch one day, a coworker joked, "We're basically supervisors of robots now." The table laughed, but beneath the humor was unease. No one said it directly, but everyone felt it. If the robots improve enough, do they still need supervisors? At home, the anxiety followed him. He found himself staring at his reflection in the dark screen of his laptop after shutting it down. For years, he had introduced himself confidently. "I'm a project manager." It had structure, stability, direction. Now, the future felt blurry. He tried to imagine explaining it to his parents, to friends, to himself. "My job was automated." The phrase sounded both modern and fragile. Not fired, not laid off, automated, as if he had been upgraded out of existence. The transition meeting was scheduled for the following week. HR framed it as an opportunity, time to explore new paths within the company. But Josh couldn't ignore the underlying truth. The company no longer needed what he uniquely offered. And that realization sparked a deeper fear. If technology could learn patterns, predict behavior, write summaries, optimize schedules, and manage workflows, then what exactly made him valuable? For the first time in his career, he wasn't afraid of working harder, he was afraid of becoming unnecessary. He didn't sleep much the night before the transition meeting. Every time he closed his eyes, his mind replayed fragments of the past few years. Late nights finishing reports, weekends preparing presentations, the satisfaction of delivering projects under pressure. He had always believed effort guaranteed security, that if you stayed adaptable, stayed sharp, stayed committed, you'd be fine. But no one had warned him that adaptability itself could be automated. The meeting was brief. almost clinical. A representative from HR, a senior manager, a slide deck filled with smooth gradients and reassuring bullet points. Words like evolution, transformation, future-ready workforce filled the screen. They emphasized that the company valued his contributions, that this shift wasn't personal, that automation was about scale, not performance. That word stuck with him. Scale. It meant the system could handle more than he ever could, faster, cheaper, continuously. They offered him two options: apply internally for a newly structured AI workflow oversight role, fewer positions available, highly competitive, or accept a transition package and explore opportunities externally with company support. Both options felt uncertain. The oversight role required skills he didn't fully have yet: advanced data modeling, AI prompt engineering, automation architecture. It wasn't impossible to learn, but it would mean starting almost from scratch in a field that was evolving monthly. The transition package meant leaving the only company he had built stability with since his 20s. On paper, he nodded professionally, asked smart questions, took notes, thanked them for transparency. Inside, something fragile cracked. After the meeting, he returned to his desk and looked around differently. The monitors, the ergonomic chair, the whiteboard filled with diagrams he had once drawn confidently. Everything suddenly felt temporary, borrowed. He began noticing something else, too. The younger employees seemed less shaken. They were already experimenting with AI tools casually, integrating them into daily work, speaking the language fluently. To them, automation wasn't a threat, it was an advantage. Josh felt caught between eras, not old enough to retire comfortably, not young enough to feel completely native to the new system. That evening, he opened a blank document and tried to list his strengths: leadership, communication, strategic planning, problem solving. But as he typed, doubt crept in. AI could assist with communication. AI could generate strategic outlines. AI could analyze problems using data he didn't even have access to. The list started shrinking in his mind. He wasn't just worried about employment anymore. He was questioning relevance in a world accelerating faster than he could recalibrate. A few days later, he met up with an old college friend who worked in a completely different field: physical therapy. When Josh explained what was happening, his friend listened quietly and then said something simple. "Can AI replace the way you make people feel when you lead a project?" Josh hesitated. It sounded comforting, but also incomplete. Because what if companies stopped valuing how people feel and focused purely on measurable output? On his way home, he thought about that question deeply. He realized his fear wasn't just about losing a job. It was about proof he mattered in a system increasingly run by invisible code. And for the first time, he asked himself something he hadn't considered before. Had he built his identity around a role that was never truly permanent? Because if that was true, then maybe this wasn't just about AI. Maybe it was about how fragile modern stability really is. That question followed him into the weeks that came next. He decided to apply for the internal AI oversight role, not because he felt confident, but because doing nothing felt worse. The application process alone was humbling. Technical assessments, case simulations, scenario planning exercises built entirely around systems he had barely touched before. He spent nights watching tutorials, reading documentation, trying to understand concepts that younger engineers seemed to grasp instinctively: prompt structures, model bias, data training loops, automation triggers. The deeper he went, the clearer something became. This wasn't just an upgrade of his old job, it was a completely different way of thinking. Instead of leading people, he would be supervising outputs. Instead of negotiating between departments, he would be refining instructions for a machine. Instead of making decisions, he would be validating algorithmic recommendations. He couldn't decide if that felt empowering or hollow. One afternoon, while preparing for an interview round, he caught himself practicing how to explain his human value in a room increasingly dominated by automation metrics. He found the phrasing ironic, human value, as if humanity itself now needed justification. The interview panel was sharp, efficient, focused. They asked how he would optimize AI workflows, reduce manual oversight, eliminate inefficiencies. Every answer seemed to revolve around minimizing human friction. At one point, one of the interviewers asked, "How comfortable are you with reducing your own involvement as systems improve?" The question landed heavier than intended. He answered professionally, talking about scalability and adaptability, but internally, he wrestled with the meaning. Was the goal of his new career path to slowly phase himself out again? After the interview, he walked outside the building instead of heading straight home. The late afternoon air felt unusually crisp. People moved around him, students, parents, delivery drivers, tourists. Life outside the tech bubble continued with messy unpredictability. And for the first time in weeks, his anxiety shifted into something quieter, reflection. He thought about the last decade of his life, the promotions he chased, the certifications he earned, the belief that climbing the right ladder guaranteed stability. He had equated progress with security, but technology didn't climb ladders, it leaped. Maybe the mistake wasn't failing to adapt fast enough. Maybe it was believing stability came from mastering a single system. That night, instead of studying automation frameworks, he opened a notebook, an actual paper notebook he hadn't used in years. He wrote a simple question at the top of the page. What do I know how to do that isn't dependent on a platform? The answers came slowly. He knew how to listen. He knew how to mediate conflict. He knew how to motivate teams when morale dropped. He knew how to simplify complex ideas for people who felt overwhelmed. None of those skills were flashy. None of them were trending on tech blogs, but they were real. And they weren't tied to one job title. For the first time since the email, he felt a subtle shift. The fear of becoming unnecessary began evolving into something else, curiosity. If automation was reshaping the landscape, maybe clinging to one shrinking corner wasn't the only option. Maybe the real question wasn't, how do I compete with AI? Maybe it was, where does being human still matter most? And that question opened a door he hadn't considered before. That question didn't give him immediate answers, but it changed the direction of his thinking. For weeks, Josh had been operating from fear of falling behind, fear of being replaced, fear of becoming irrelevant in a system that optimized everything except uncertainty. But curiosity felt different. It wasn't defensive, it was exploratory. He started noticing something subtle in conversations around him. The loudest voices in tech were obsessed with efficiency, faster outputs, lower costs, scalable systems. But outside that bubble, people were craving something else entirely: clarity, reassurance, guidance. One evening, while scrolling through job boards half-heartedly, he stumbled across roles he would have ignored months ago. Not traditional tech titles, not high-profile positions, roles in change management, organizational coaching, human-centered training for teams integrating AI systems. The descriptions were interesting. Companies didn't just need automation, they needed people who could help employees adapt emotionally and strategically to automation. He paused. That was familiar territory. He thought back to how his own team had reacted when the automation rollout began. The silence in meetings, the hesitation in voices, the uncertainty no dashboard could measure. The system optimized tasks, but it didn't address fear, and he understood fear intimately now. Over the next few days, he began reaching out to former colleagues, not to ask about technical openings, but to ask how their teams were handling transitions. The responses were revealing. Some departments were struggling with morale. Others had productivity dips despite better tools. Managers felt pressure to appear confident even when they were uncertain themselves. The pattern was clear. Technology was advancing faster than people were emotionally prepared for. Josh began reframing his situation. Maybe he wasn't behind. Maybe he had been positioned at the intersection of something bigger, the human side of automation. He updated his resume, but this time he didn't focus solely on metrics and deliverables. He highlighted leadership during high-pressure rollouts, conflict resolution, cross-functional communication, guiding teams through uncertainty. For the first time since receiving that email, his resume felt like a story of resilience rather than replacement. The internal AI oversight role eventually sent him a polite rejection. The competition had been intense. They went with candidates who had deeper technical specialization. Oddly, the rejection didn't hit as hard as he expected, because by then, his mindset had shifted. He wasn't trying to outrun the machine anymore. He was trying to understand where machines stopped. He enrolled in a short certification program focused on organizational change in tech-driven environments, not because it guaranteed anything, but because it aligned with the direction his thinking was heading. In class discussions, he met others facing similar transitions, former marketers, operations leads, HR managers, all navigating the same undercurrent of uncertainty. They weren't obsolete, they were evolving. And something clicked. Automation didn't eliminate value, it redistributed it. The skills that once felt secondary, empathy, clarity, leadership under ambiguity, were becoming anchors in unstable environments. One afternoon, during a group exercise, he was asked to facilitate a mock session where employees were anxious about job changes due to automation. As he guided the conversation, he noticed something familiar returning: confidence. Not the confidence of mastering a dashboard, the confidence of helping people feel steady when the ground shifted. When the exercise ended, a classmate pulled him aside and said, "You're good at this. You make complicated change feel manageable." That sentence stayed with him. For months, he had measured himself against algorithms. Now he was measuring himself against impact. And for the first time since the email, the future didn't look like a shrinking tunnel. It looked uncertain, but open. He realized something profound. Technology wasn't asking him to disappear. It was forcing him to redefine what part of himself truly mattered. A few months later, Josh was sitting in a conference room that looked very different from the one where he had first read that optimization email. This time, he wasn't waiting to be phased out. He was standing at the front of the room. The company wasn't the same one he had left, but it was still in tech, still integrating automation, still moving fast. The difference was in the role he now held: organizational transition consultant. His job wasn't to compete with AI systems, it was to help people adapt to them. In front of him sat a group of mid-level managers. Some looked skeptical, others anxious. A few had that same distant stare he remembered from his own reflection months earlier. He recognized it instantly: the quiet fear of becoming unnecessary. He began the session not with statistics or charts, but with a question. What part of your job feels hardest to automate? At first, the room was silent. Then slowly, hands raised. Mentoring junior staff, resolving conflict between departments, convincing leadership to pivot strategy, calming clients during uncertainty. Josh nodded. He didn't dismiss automation. He didn't pretend AI wasn't powerful. Instead, he reframed the conversation. Automation handles repetition. It processes scale. It predicts patterns. But it doesn't replace responsibility. It doesn't carry emotional weight. It doesn't build trust. And trust, he explained, becomes more valuable, not less, when change accelerates. As he spoke, he realized something quietly transformative. Months ago, he believed his value came from managing workflows efficiently. Now he understood his value came from navigating complexity humanely. The fear of being replaced had forced him to confront a truth he might have ignored otherwise. Any identity built entirely around a specific system is fragile. Systems evolved, titles shift, tools upgrade. But transferable human skills, the ability to guide, interpret, connect, travel across systems. After the session ended, one manager lingered behind. She admitted she had been losing sleep over automation in her department. She said quietly, "I thought I was the only one who felt threatened." Josh smiled, not out of superiority, but recognition. You're not being replaced, you're being repositioned. The question is whether you choose to define that position yourself. Driving home that evening, he reflected on how dramatically his perspective had changed. The original email that once felt like an ending now felt like a catalyst. AI hadn't destroyed his career. It had dismantled a narrow version of it. The world was still changing rapidly. Automation would continue evolving. Some roles would disappear, new ones would emerge. The uncertainty wasn't going away, but neither was human adaptability. Josh no longer introduced himself solely by a job title. When people asked what he did, he answered differently now. I help people navigate change. It was broader, less rigid, more resilient. And perhaps that was the deeper lesson hidden beneath all the fear. The future doesn't belong exclusively to machines or to humans. It belongs to those willing to redefine themselves when the landscape shifts. The email that once made him feel obsolete had forced him to confront something uncomfortable but necessary. Security doesn't come from being irreplaceable. It comes from being adaptable in ways machines can't replicate. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like he was racing against technology. He felt aligned with the part of himself technology could never fully replicate. Not efficiency, not scale, but humanity.